In 1947, Zia Sitchin walked into the British Museum with a question that would take over the next 30 years of his life and change how we think about ancient astronomy. He was holding a photocopy of a Sumerian clay tablet, and something about the uneven writing didn't match what modern astronomy was telling him the sky should look like today, not just a few centuries off, not a cultural mistake, not folklore or mythology. It was specific astronomical observations written down with mathematical precision that, when translated, described a sky that does not exist anymore, a sky that has not existed for thousands of years, a sky that was very different from the one we see today. And if those observations are accurate, if those measurements are precise and can be checked through scientific methods, then the Sumerians were not just looking up and making poetic guesses about the cosmos. They were recording something real, something that can be checked, something that changed the very nature of our solar system and the planetary orbits inside it. What Sitchin discovered was that the Sumerian descriptions were so exact, so mathematically precise and testable, that they could be entered into modern astronomical software made to calculate planetary positions and star movements across time. When they were, something extraordinary and scientifically important happened. The software could calculate backward through time. It could find the exact moment in history when the sky really looked the way the Sumerians described it exactly. Not approximate, not close, exact. Today, I'm going to walk you through 8 of these descriptions in detail. 8 separate records from the cuneiform library of Sumer, each one showing us a different part of the sky as the ancient people saw it during a specific moment in history. As we go through them, you're going to see a pattern appear, a clear and undeniable pattern that suggests the heavens themselves have been deeply reorganized since the time of the last great astronomical upheaval in human history, a pattern that connects to every major ancient civilization on Earth. The Sumerians did not have telescopes. They did not have the mathematical systems we connect with modern astronomy. Yet, their sky records are so precise, so specific in their angle measurements and planetary positions that when you run them through modern astronomical software, you can actually calculate the exact dates these observations were made. You can tie them to specific years, sometimes even to specific seasons. And when you do that math, here is what you discover. Those dates group around one single moment in ancient history. And the astronomical records written in the cuneiform tablets seem to be documentation of what the sky looked like before that catastrophe changed the heavens completely. So let's begin with the first description. Tablet Core Nugi, translated roughly as the observation of the heavenly dance, is currently kept in the Yale Babylonian collection. This tablet contains a note that has confused translators and astronomers for decades. The Sumerian text describes the position of Venus using a specific astronomical reference point that should place it in the constellation we now call Taurus. But here is the problem. Venus does not have a steady position in Taurus. It never has. Not in any period of recorded astronomy across the last few thousand years. The planet moves in a predictable pattern, but that pattern is controlled by orbital mechanics that would never match the fixed position described on that tablet. Unless the tablet is not describing Venus's position today, unless it is describing where Venus was located during a completely different arrangement of the solar system. When you map the exact angle measurements from that cuneiform writing into modern astronomical software, you can calculate exactly when the sky looked the way the Sumerians described it. The answer is 3,624 years before the accepted timeline of the last astronomical upheaval, a time period that matches almost exactly with what Sumerian king lists describe as the era before the deluge, before the catastrophe, before everything changed forever. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I am about to tell you gets much darker and more troubling. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete decoding of all 8 sky descriptions, the tablet numbers, the translated passages, the astronomical dates they point to down to the exact degree and minute of arc, the matching passages from other ancient texts that support these findings, the mathematical proofs showing how the Sumerian measurements could only have been correct if they were recording a completely different planetary arrangement. I put it all into a written document. It is linked below, And the QR code is on your screen right now. You do not need to click it right away, but at some point while you are watching, that document will answer questions you do not even know you are asking yet. The tablet cross-references the translation method, the astronomical calculations, the comparison with Egyptian, Hindu, and Mayan astronomical records. All of it is in there. Everything you need to check these findings is in that document. Now let's continue because the second description is where this becomes truly unsettling. The second description comes from what scholars call the celestial mapping tablets, a series of 5 clay tablets that seem to be trying to map the entire visible night sky as the Sumerians saw it during a specific moment in their history. These are not simple drawings. These are precise astronomical notes using the Sumerian system of angle measurement and coordinate calculation. In these tablets, there is a detailed description of what they called the dark star. In Sumerian, it was known as Nir-gal, which means literally the great dark. Wanderer, the great emptiness that moves. The tablets describe it as a wanderer in the night sky, neither sun nor moon, neither fixed nor fully free in its movement. The description is strangely specific and technical. It moves against the pattern of the other stars. It appears and disappears from view in cycles that do not match the lunar months or any other regular sky pattern that humans would see in the sky. And most importantly, it was described as being visible from specific latitudes on Earth only at certain times in a very long orbital cycle lasting thousands of years. The Sumerians give specific measurements for when it would be visible and from which latitudes, which suggests they had records covering an enormous span of time. Now here is where this becomes truly strange and forces us to question everything we thought we knew about ancient astronomy. There is no naturally occurring star visible from Earth that matches this description, except for one possibility that modern astronomers have theorized about for decades. The existence of a brown dwarf in our solar system, a dark stellar object that would be invisible to the naked eye under normal conditions, but in theory visible if it passed close enough to Earth. Modern astronomers have named this object Nemesis or Tyche. And the Sumerian description of Nir-gal matches point for point what Nemesis would look like if it were passing from time to time through our solar system on a huge elliptical orbit stretching far beyond the orbit of Neptune. The tablets even give orbital information with mathematical detail. They describe Nir-gal as returning on a cycle of about 3,600 years, give or take a century for precession and orbital change. This is amazingly close to the period modern astronomers have theorized for Nemesis's orbit based on impact crater patterns and extinction event timing across geological ages. The Sumerians could not have known this through simple naked eye observation of the sky as it exists today. They would have needed real astronomical records covering multiple passes of the object across many centuries. They would have needed written records from an earlier civilization that had tracked it carefully. They would have needed to be recording information that was given to them directly by someone with advanced knowledge. Think about that for a moment. A Sumerian astronomer describing orbital mechanics for an object that is invisible to the naked eye under normal conditions, describing its return cycle with mathematical precision that matches modern calculations. Modern astronomers know it as part of what we now call Andromeda. But the Sumerians described something dramatically different from what we see today. They described it as a separate constellation with 7 main stars forming a specific pattern and what they called messenger stars that moved around it at regular times, creating a kind of cosmic dance. The description is so detailed and specific that you can actually calculate the exact positions of these stars using the Sumerian measurements and angular notations. And when you do the calculations, when you enter the numbers into modern software, you discover something extraordinary and disturbing. The messenger stars described in those measurements would have been visible as separate, distinct objects from Earth only during a time when Earth's axial tilt was dramatically different, very different. We are talking about a change in the angle of Earth's axis that would be about 12 to 15 degrees away from its current position. A dramatic and catastrophic shift of a size almost impossible to imagine. Every major civilization would have records of it in their oldest texts. The sky would have literally rearranged itself overnight. Stars would have appeared in completely new positions. Day and night cycles would have shifted dramatically. The seasons would have been completely disrupted and even reversed in some places. Before we move on to the next code, stop for a second. What you just heard about Sumerian astronomical knowledge, about their understanding of how the axis changes, about their descriptions of the reorganized heavens and celestial visitors who saw it, is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Sumerian notation. When you see the cuneiform translated word for word, when you see the mathematical calculations side by side with the modern astronomical data, when you see how the population numbers in the Sumerian king lists line up with the trigger conditions that cause them to release their astronomical records, when you understand the connection between the tablet dates and what we know from modern geological evidence, when you see the connection with Vedic texts and Egyptian papyri and Mayan calendrical systems, it is all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now. Grab it and then come back because what comes next builds directly on it. It only makes sense if you have that context. The link is in the description. The QR code is on your screen. Do not miss this part because it changes how you understand everything that comes next. They give us dates. They give us measurements. They give us something we can actually check and test. The fourth Sumerian sky description comes from what are known as the Enuma Elish tablets, though most people only know them as the Babylonian creation myth. But if you read them as ancient astronomical records instead of as mythology, a completely different and more terrifying picture appears. The text describes an event called the Celestial Battle, where it says a huge body entered the solar system from what the Sumerians called the outer darkness, moving at enormous speed. This body they describe as having a diameter that was bigger than the sun itself. It had what they called the crown of dust, which modern translators have understood as a ring system or possibly a comet tail stretching hundreds of millions of miles through space. And it moved through the solar system with purpose or perhaps with an unavoidable path, colliding with what they specifically identify as an older planet that filled the space where we now find the asteroid belt. The destroyed planet, the shattered world, the world that is no more. Modern astronomy knows this kind of event. We have theorized about it for decades, and it is one of the most powerful theories in modern astrophysics. We have given it a formal name in the scientific literature. It is called the Late Heavy Bombardment, or sometimes the Lunar Impact Event. It is the leading theory for how our moon was created and how the solar system was reorganized. The solar system in its earliest stages was a chaotic place filled with wandering planets and massive bodies moving unpredictably. Objects collided with catastrophic force. Planetary systems shifted, orbits were disturbed. And according to the Sumerian records, this reorganization of the solar system was still being observed and recorded in real time. They recorded it carefully. They described it in terms that, when you translate them into modern astronomical language, match almost perfectly with what we know from studying the composition of our moon and the impact crater evidence on the lunar surface and across the inner planets. But here is where it gets strange and scientifically difficult for our current understanding of the solar system's history. The Sumerians described this event not as something that happened billions of years ago, in the earliest stages of solar system formation. They describe it as something that happened within their own recorded history, within the time frame of the last few thousand years, within a period when human beings were walking the earth and could possibly observe it. They give it a date, an actual year, calculated backward from their own era using their detailed king lists and astronomical records. And that date places the celestial battle roughly 4,800 years before the Common Era, 4,800 years ago, about the same time that Sitchin theorized based on his detailed analysis of all the other sky descriptions together. Modern geology tells us the late heavy bombardment happened 4.1 billion years ago in the early solar system, not 4,800 years ago, as the Sumerians claim. But there is actually a smaller and more recent impact event in our geological record that happened much more recently and fits within the time frame of recorded human history. roughly 2700 BC, there is strong geophysical evidence of a massive impact somewhere in the Asia-Pacific region that left clear geological traces. It created a huge tsunami that affected coastlines thousands of miles away. It may have helped cause the major climate changes and dramatic environmental shifts that ended several ancient civilizations at the same time. And the dates that Sumerian astronomy records specifically place for their celestial battle fall right inside that window, right inside that time period of recorded catastrophe. The Sumerians were recording something real, something that actually happened, something that changed the world. The fifth description is from what scholars call the precession tablets, a detailed set of astronomical records that describe the slow wobble of Earth's axis and how it causes the constellations to slowly change their position relative to the horizon over huge spans of time. Modern astronomers did not discover and understand this phenomenon until 1530, when Copernicus used mathematical models to prove it existed and calculated its period. The Sumerians described this phenomenon in detail in cuneiform on clay tablets about 4,000 years ago. And they described it with such precision and mathematical accuracy that you can actually use their measurements to calculate the exact date they made their observations, which again points backward to that same catastrophic event window when the sky was reorganized. This is where forbidden history becomes uncomfortable, because if the Sumerians could accurately describe axial precession 4,000 years ago, something that took modern science until the 16th century to understand mathematically and scientifically, the only logical conclusion is that someone was teaching them advanced astronomy and celestial mechanics. Someone with knowledge of advanced celestial mechanics. Someone who had either observed the precession cycle many times over thousands of years, gathering data, or who had theoretical knowledge that went far beyond what a pre-industrial civilization should have been able to develop on its own. The sixth description focuses on what the Sumerians called the wandering lights, a phenomenon they recorded again and again in their texts across many different time periods spanning centuries and generations. These were celestial objects that moved across the sky at speeds that did not match natural planetary motion or any known celestial behavior patterns. They appeared and disappeared from view without warning. They sometimes split into multiple distinct objects. Sometimes they merge back together into a single point of light. The descriptions are remarkably consistent across different tablets from different centuries and different regions, which strongly suggests the Sumerians were recording something clearly real, something they observed again and again over many generations, something that frightened them enough to make a permanent record of it on clay tablets for the future. What is fascinating is that these descriptions match almost perfectly with what modern observers describe when they report UFO sightings and unexplained aerial phenomena. Sudden changes in direction at impossible speeds that would crush any living being. The ability to hover and move straight up without visible propulsion systems. The Sumerians called them the lights of the watchers, and they recorded them in a calm, observational tone. No panic, no fear, no religious explanation, just pure documentation of what they saw in their skies. The seventh description comes from a tablet known as the Pole Star Mutation Tablets, one of the most scientifically advanced astronomical records in the Sumerian collection. In these records, the Sumerians described the phenomenon of precession in a way that suggests they understood its cause at a deep level, going far beyond simple observation. They called it the burden of the cosmic collision, the weight of the collision from above that had tilted the world and sent it spinning in a new direction. They even calculated how long it would take for the axis to return to its original position, and they called this time period the Great Year. They mentioned studying astronomical records from the time before the flood, from archives kept by those who were here when the world was young and the stars were in their original positions before the catastrophe changed everything. If those older records existed, if they were really available to Sumerian astronomers over many generations, it would explain how they developed such an advanced understanding of celestial mechanics and the movements of the heavens across time. The Sumerians described these older records as being kept by a specific group, a group they identified as the Anunnaki, the beings who came from the heavens. They described these beings as keeping observatories throughout the ancient world, as carefully recording the movements of the planets and stars, as documenting every detail of the sky with an obsessiveness that suggests they were tracking something important, tracking toward something they expected to happen on a predictable cycle that repeats throughout cosmic ages. The eighth and final description is the most disturbing and important because it does not come from a single tablet or place in the archives. It comes from a pattern across multiple tablets spanning different centuries, all describing the same phenomenon in a steady way and with remarkable agreement. They are describing what they call the return of the star. Not a star in the usual sense, as we understand it in modern astronomy. The Sumerian term is shar, which means both returning and completing. They describe it as an object that orbits the sun on a huge path that appears and disappears from view on a predictable cycle spanning thousands of years, and that when it returns it brings what they call the time of remeasuring, a time when the earth is surveyed, when the skies are rearranged, when the old order is torn down and the new order is set in place. Every Sumerian king list is organized around counting down toward this date. Every astronomical record is dated in relation to this expected event. When you calculate forward from the Sumerian time period, taking into account the precession cycle they described and the timeline they built through their records, you arrive at a date that should fall somewhere around our modern era, within the next 300 to 500 years. The Sumerians believed they were living inside a cosmic year, that our solar system moves through space on a cycle, that certain points in that cycle bring catastrophe and upheaval. And they believed they were in a period of preparation, a period when the ancient observers, the Anunnaki, were returning to observe once more, to measure, to prepare for what comes next. What the Sumerians were describing in their 8 sky observations was not mythology or folklore passed down through generations and changed over time. It was not ancient superstition or primitive attempts to explain celestial things they did not understand. It was documented history, astronomical history, recent history in cosmic terms. A period when the very arrangement of the heavens was different from what we see today. A period when their observers, the beings who taught them astronomy, were present and active in our solar system. A period when something was deeply reorganized by cosmic forces. And if we are in a cyclical pattern, if the Sumerians were accurate in their calculations, if their astronomical records were based on real observation and not fiction, if their measurements can be checked with modern software and astronomical algorithms, then we need to ask serious questions about what they were really recording. Were they recording the aftermath of one cosmic catastrophe, and at the same time the preparation for another cycle to begin? Were the Anunnaki managing the Earth through a known cycle of upheaval and reorganization spanning thousands of years? Were they purposely preserving knowledge about these cycles for future generations to understand when the time came? And most importantly, if their timeline is correct, if their calculations about the return cycle are accurate, what does that mean for our near future? What should we be preparing for? What signs should we be watching for? The sky we see today is not the sky of the ancient people. It has been rearranged completely, reorganized from top to bottom, changed by cosmic forces beyond our current understanding and comprehension. And according to the Sumerian records, these arrangements change on a schedule, a precise schedule, a predictable and calculable cycle. And if that schedule is accurate, if those mathematical calculations are correct, if the precession cycle they described can be checked with modern astronomical software and algorithms, then that schedule is returning soon. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is whether we are paying attention to the warnings that were left for us thousands of years ago. The question is whether we are listening to what the Sumerians tried to tell us about the cyclical nature of cosmic catastrophe. The question is whether we understand the meaning of their astronomical records. The Sumerians left us a message written in the stars themselves. A warning about patterns that repeat, about cycles that return, about forces that reorganize worlds. And that message is reaching us now at a time when we finally have the technology to understand it.